The CEO decided to pose as a humble volunteer at his company's Thanksgiving charity dinner. What he discovers leaves him speechless. Before we dive into the story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Stay tuned until the end, things are about to get intense. Now, let's get into it. William Dalton had it all, or so it seemed. At 38, he was the dynamic CEO of Dalton Industries, a conglomerate that seemed to touch everything from tech startups to philanthropic ventures. His days were punctuated by sharp suits, boardroom negotiations, and a relentless drive that left little room for doubt. But if you looked closer, you'd see a man who moved with a precision that bordered on mechanical, eyes that flickered only briefly with emotion before the shutters fell back into place. He was known for his sweeping gestures of charity, yet whispers had begun to reach him. His biggest charitable venture, the Heart to Hands Thanksgiving program, was more of a marketing ploy than a true community effort. William Dalton was born into privilege, the kind of wealth that ensured doors would always open and obstacles were more concept than reality. His father, an imposing figure who built Dalton Industries from the ground up, instilled in him the cutthroat principles of success, ambition, precision, and results. William absorbed these lessons like gospel, climbing the corporate ladder with relentless efficiency and unparalleled intelligence. But while his father had been all grit and determination, William's mother had been a balancing force. She was warm, deeply charitable, and believed in the power of community. She championed their involvement in philanthropy, planting the seeds of what would eventually grow into the Heart to Hands program. Her early death left a void in William's life that even his towering successes couldn't fill. Despite his upbringing, William wasn't heartless. Colleagues would describe him as methodical, brilliant, and even fair, but distant. In the sharp corners of his corporate office, empathy was a luxury he couldn't afford. The long hours and ruthless negotiations had built a fortress around him, one that allowed him to thrive professionally while dimming the spark of genuine connection. His lifestyle reflected this duality. The days were defined by high-stakes meetings, emails that never stopped pinging, and a schedule packed to the minute. Yet, at night, he'd return to his modern, impeccably decorated penthouse, where silence reigned and the city lights were the only companions. The stark, immaculate space mirrored his internal life, beautiful but cold. His career was a series of meticulously calculated moves. Under his leadership, Dalton Industries expanded into global markets, acquired competitors, and launched innovative, profitable ventures. Publicly, he was praised for his genius in navigating complex deals and driving growth, yet his dedication to philanthropy was often seen as a nod to his mother's legacy rather than a sincere passion. The Heart to Hands program had grown but had lost its touch. It was managed by subordinates and marked by impersonal donations, not direct involvement. As the years went on, reports and rumors reached William's ears about the state of Heart to Hands. The program, once known for its impact, now carried whispers of disconnection. Its primary aim, to provide a free Thanksgiving meal for underserved communities, was being questioned. Recipients described it as impersonal, a well-intentioned idea executed without heart. Some even said it felt like a staged photo opportunity more than an earnest endeavor. William found these murmurs unsettling, though he never let it show. On the surface, he brushed off criticisms with a casual nod and a well-rehearsed statement. But the gnawing unease followed him home, where he'd sit with a glass of whiskey, staring out at the sea of city lights, wondering if there was truth to it. After all, Heart to Hands was supposed to be different, rooted in his mother's ethos of genuine care. But had he strayed too far from that? It was a subtle comment from his CFO that finally cut through his guarded exterior. "It's good PR, Will, but we might need to reconsider the budget next year. The program looks nice on paper, but we need tangible benefits to justify the expense." Something snapped into place then. "Looks nice on paper," the phrase clanged in his mind, sharp and hollow. One night, unable to sleep, William combed through an old box of keepsakes tucked away in a forgotten corner of his penthouse. Inside were handwritten notes, family photos, and a well-worn leather journal that had belonged to his mother. Its pages were filled with her musings, sketches, and memories. The entry that caught his attention read, "True kindness isn't shown, it's lived. To see the world, you have to stand in it, not above it." The sentiment hit him harder than he expected, awakening something dormant. The disconnect between his public actions and personal reality became starkly clear. He had been orchestrating goodwill from a high-rise office, when the essence of giving lay in being present. That night, as the city hummed quietly below him, an idea took root. William's decision to go undercover wasn't impulsive, and it wasn't made without resistance. His inner circle balked when he floated the idea to a trusted aide under the guise of testing employee engagement. But William was steadfast. This wasn't just about evaluating a charity, it was about facing the unsettling question of whether he'd lost sight of the man his mother had raised him to be. Transforming into Liam Carter required careful planning. He practiced speaking less formally, adopting a more casual wardrobe, and let himself be guided by the instinct to observe rather than command. The simple act of dressing down, trading tailored suits for flannel shirts and worn jeans, was both liberating and unnerving. By the time he informed his board of an extended leave to pursue personal growth, William felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. His assistant raised an eyebrow at the vague reason, but nodded dutifully. He was walking into the unknown, willingly stripping himself of power and authority to find out if Heart to Hands had become the hollow shell people suggested. The choice to go undercover, rather than delegating an inspection or sending out surveys, was personal. William knew that reports and spreadsheets couldn't tell him the stories that mattered. The truth lay in the unfiltered moments, the smiles and sighs that no annual report would capture. If he wanted to understand, he needed to be there, not as a CEO who could command respect, but as someone whose value would come from contribution alone. Memories of his mother's involvement in small community events flitted through his mind, how she would sit on the floor with children, helping them string popcorn garlands or simply listening to their stories. That was the essence of Heart to Hands, the reason it existed at all. If the program had lost that touch, it was on him to bring it back, or accept the uncomfortable reality that it might be beyond saving. He could have sent an assistant or arranged for a third-party evaluation, but that would only prove the point that he remained detached. William's decision was about reconnecting, not just with the community, but with the ideals he'd let slip away. He wanted to know the truth, raw and unvarnished. The following week, with his mind made up, William put on his disguise for the first time and drove himself to the community center. As he stood in front of the old building, heart pounding, the significance of his decision washed over him. This was his chance to rediscover what his mother's vision truly meant. The November sun cast a golden light over the city as William, now Liam, approached the community center. Its old brick exterior, painted in a cheerful yellow that had faded with time, stood as a quiet reminder of the hundreds of gatherings it had hosted. Laughter and chatter poured out of the wide double doors, carrying the scent of roasting vegetables and spiced pies into the crisp air. Liam adjusted his worn backpack and stepped inside, feeling the shift from the structured coldness of boardrooms to the bustling warmth of a space alive with purpose. Immediately, he was swept into the organized chaos of the annual Thanksgiving meal program. Volunteers of all ages darted between tables, setting up decorations and stacking trays of mashed potatoes and turkey. The room hummed with energy, each movement choreographed in the unspoken language of community work. Children giggled as they dodged through adults' legs, their faces sticky with the remnants of early dessert samples. Before he could take another step, a voice called out over the noise. "Hey, you must be Liam." The woman approaching him had a presence that cut through the bustle. She was holding a clipboard, her eyes sharp but kind, and wore a sweater adorned with tiny autumn leaves. This was Emily Hart, the program coordinator who had turned a modest community tradition into an annual highlight. "Yeah, that's me," Liam said, managing a smile that felt both new and familiar. His pulse quickened as she extended a hand, warm and confident. "Welcome. We need all hands on deck today," she said, eyes scanning the room even as she spoke. "You up for some heavy lifting?" "Absolutely," he replied, the word coming out more eager than he intended. She nodded, a hint of approval crossing her face. Emily turned on her heel, her ponytail swinging as she walked him to a section of the room where boxes of canned goods and potatoes sat waiting to be sorted. He fell in line with her pace, watching how she moved through the room, acknowledging everyone with a smile or a quick word. It was as if she carried the room's heartbeat with her. "All right, Liam," she said, stopping at the pile of boxes. "Think you can handle this?" She tilted her head slightly, teasing but serious. "I'll do my best," Liam said, rolling up his sleeves. The morning unfolded in a series of small but telling moments. As he organized cans of green beans and stacked boxes, he observed Emily in action. She seemed to be everywhere at once, coordinating deliveries, answering questions, even pausing to lift a child up to see the decorations better. Volunteers called her name constantly, some asking for guidance, others just wanting her attention for a second. Each time, she responded with the same focus and warmth. She never seemed flustered, only determined. Liam noted the way she made people feel seen, how the elderly volunteer with the shaky hands beamed when she asked him to help with name tags, or how the high school students sneaking a taste of pie were met with a mock-serious glance that quickly turned into laughter. There was no doubt that the community loved her, not just for what she did, but for who she was. Suddenly, Emily was back at his side, picking up a box and balancing it on her hip. "So, Liam, what's your story?" she asked, eyes twinkling with a mixture of curiosity and friendliness. "What brings you to our little chaos?" He chuckled, choosing his words carefully. "Needed a break from, well, let's just say work can be pretty overwhelming. Thought volunteering might remind me what it's all for." She nodded, as if she understood more than he'd said. "You're in the right place, then. This is where people come to find their center again," she said, her voice softening just enough to leave an echo in his mind. Their conversation was interrupted by a group of young volunteers who rushed over, arms full of decorative paper turkeys and strings of orange lights. "Emily! We can't find more tape," one of them exclaimed, eyes wide with worry that only teenagers seem to muster for small crises. Emily turned to them without missing a beat. "Check the supply closet, second shelf on the left," she said, then added, "If it's not there, come back and we'll improvise." As the teens scurried off, she glanced back at Liam and grinned. "You'd be amazed at the things we can make work around here. Glue sticks and hope, mostly." He laughed, a sound that felt unfamiliar in its genuineness. There was something about her, the way she joked, the unflinching confidence that kept the room moving, that sparked a forgotten part of him. Hours passed in a blur. Liam found himself pulled into more tasks, setting tables, hauling boxes, even helping a volunteer fix a wobbly chair leg. Each job carried a strange satisfaction, a sense of contributing in a way that hadn't come from signing checks or announcing grants. This was tactile, real, and immediate. At one point, an elderly woman named Ruth shuffled over to him with a smile. "First time here, isn't it?" she asked, her voice warm and familiar, like the crackle of a fireplace. "Yes, ma'am," he admitted. "First day." "Well, don't be a stranger," she said, patting his arm. "It's people like you who keep this going." Before he could respond, Emily called from across the room, "Liam, mind giving us a hand over here?" He joined her by the kitchen entrance, where a new shipment of produce had just arrived. She handed him a clipboard, their hands brushing briefly. The contact was small, insignificant to anyone else, but for William, it felt like a reminder of something he hadn't realized he'd forgotten, the comfort of being part of something bigger than himself. "Thanks for diving in today," Emily said, her voice sincere. "It means more than you know." "Glad to help," Liam said, and as he looked around at the bustling room, filled with laughter, urgency, and unfiltered joy, he found himself meaning it more than he'd expected. William had always considered himself adaptable, capable of moving seamlessly from high-stakes meetings to charity galas. But here, in the heart of the community center, surrounded by laughter and the clatter of dishes, he was on unfamiliar ground. The apron tied around his waist felt more like an odd costume than functional wear, and the knife he gripped slid awkwardly in his hand as he struggled to dice carrots without them skittering across the counter. A nearby volunteer, a young man named Marco, chuckled as he caught a runaway carrot. "First day's always the hardest," Marco said, his grin wide and encouraging. William laughed, an embarrassed sound that pulled him out of his practiced composure. "Guess I'm more used to cutting deals than vegetables," he joked, which earned a round of good-natured laughter from the nearby volunteers. The comment was true enough, if a little too close to reality. Under the bright kitchen lights, he settled into a rhythm, adjusting to the role with a mix of concentration and awkwardness. The kitchen was alive with movement, knives chopped, water boiled, and the savory scent of roasting turkey wafted through the air. William felt a drop of sweat form on his temple as he moved from peeling potatoes to stirring giant pots of gravy. Each task grounded him, drawing him further from the sterile world of boardrooms and stock portfolios. Here, his contributions were visible, immediate. "Careful there, Liam," called Ruth, the elderly volunteer he'd met on his first day. She winked as he stirred too vigorously, causing a splash of gravy to leap from the pot. He gave her a sheepish grin and dialed down the intensity, earning a gentle nod of approval. The morning unfolded with its share of small mishaps, a tray of rolls almost dropped, a too-thick batch of mashed potatoes that required emergency thinning, and an amusing moment when a misplaced ladle ended up in the dessert section. But each little setback came with smiles and light-hearted jabs from the team. Marco leaned over at one point, whispering, "This is what we call organized chaos," as he handed William a mop for the minor gravy spill. Between tasks, William found moments to chat with other volunteers. He listened as Beth, a middle-aged woman with warm eyes and a penchant for storytelling, described how the Thanksgiving program had started as a modest gathering years ago. "Back then, it was just a few of us, a single pot of soup, and more hope than food," she said, eyes twinkling with nostalgia. Emily was new then, too, but even from the start, she brought the spark, you know? Made us all feel like this was more than just a meal. It became clear to William that the strength of the program wasn't just in the food served but in the atmosphere Emily had created, a blend of respect, dignity, and genuine care. He looked around the room, taking in the chatter and bursts of laughter. It was imperfect, yes, but it was real. That authenticity was something money couldn't manufacture, and it was precisely what the recent reports had missed. By midday, William was starting to feel the soreness in his arms and the stiffness in his back. Yet, for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, the fatigue felt satisfying. He wiped his brow and leaned against a counter, watching Emily as she moved between tables, chatting with the guests who had begun to filter in for the early meal. There was a sincerity in her smile that struck him, a warmth that couldn't be faked. "Mrs. O'Leary. Back again, I see." Emily's voice was bright as she crouched beside an elderly woman in a wheelchair. She patted the woman's arm affectionately before leaning closer to hear her quiet words. The way Emily's face softened, eyebrows knitting in empathy, made it clear that she wasn't just checking a box. She was there, truly present for every story, every sigh, every laugh. William watched as Emily listened with undivided attention, nodding as Mrs. O'Leary recounted tales from past Thanksgiving dinners. The older woman's eyes, cloudy with age, lit up as she spoke. Emily's reaction wasn't just polite, it was deeply engaged, as though the room around them had paused for that one interaction. When Mrs. O'Leary finished, Emily squeezed her hand, promising to send someone with a second helping of cranberry sauce. A soft pang of admiration bloomed in William's chest. He'd seen people act for an audience, pretend at empathy when the cameras were on, but this was different. Emily's compassion was woven into her every gesture, filling the room as effortlessly as the scent of roasted turkey. "Hey, Liam," Marco called, breaking his reverie. "You ready to serve up some pie?" He waved a spatula and pointed toward a table where slices of pumpkin pie awaited plating. "Let's do it," William said, shaking off the odd feeling that had wrapped around him. As he served pie with Marco, he found himself listening to the guests' stories of their families, jobs lost and found, and memories of past holidays. Each one was a reminder that these were people, not numbers on a report. Hours passed, marked by more shared smiles and the occasional hiccup when they ran low on gravy or forks. Yet, every challenge was met with a solution, usually involving Emily's quick thinking and a bit of improvisation. When a tray of cornbread threatened to burn, she called out for quick hands, and William found himself rushing to assist. Their eyes met briefly, and she grinned, a shared acknowledgement of the day's highs and lows. As the last plates were served and the cleanup began, the energy in the room shifted from urgent to content. William felt the ache in his feet and the strain in his back, but there was something else there, too, a strange fullness that had nothing to do with the food. Emily passed by, balancing a stack of empty trays, and paused just long enough to catch his eye. "Nice work today, Liam," she said, voice low but warm. "Looks like you're a natural." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the community center's bustling interior. After hours of relentless activity, a soft lull had settled in. The volunteers took a collective breath, gathering around mismatched folding tables where lukewarm coffee and a plate of half-eaten cookies sat as their shared reward. Emily dropped into the chair opposite William, her cheeks flushed from the day's work and a few wisps of hair escaping her ponytail. "Feels like we've been running a marathon, doesn't it?" she said, chuckling as she wiped her hands on her apron, leaving behind smudges of flour and sauce. William nodded, the soreness in his muscles reminding him of just how far removed his usual routine was from this. He glanced around at the small group of volunteers still chatting and laughing, their tired faces bright with the satisfaction of the day's efforts. "Yeah, but it's a good kind of tired," he admitted, the words surprising him with their truth. Emily's eyes softened as she took a sip of her coffee. "That's why I keep coming back," she said, her voice a touch more serious. "It's not just about feeding people. It's about feeling like you're part of something that really matters." She looked down at the table, tracing a chip in the surface with her fingertip. "This program saved me once, you know." William tilted his head, curiosity sparking. "Saved you?" She nodded, meeting his gaze. "Yeah. It was years ago, after I lost my dad. He was my rock, and when he was gone, everything fell apart. The holidays felt empty, and I didn't know how to put myself back together. Then, one year, a friend dragged me here. I didn't want to come, didn't think I had anything to offer. But then I did. I peeled potatoes, stirred gravy, smiled at strangers. And by the end of that day, I felt whole, even if just a little." William's chest tightened at the raw honesty in her voice. Emily spoke as if each word carried the weight of those difficult years, yet her eyes held no bitterness, only resilience. The silence stretched between them, comfortable and loaded with meaning. "I can see why it's so important to you," he said, his tone more serious than he intended. "I've spent a lot of time trying to build things that are supposed to help people, but I don't think I ever understood what it actually meant. Not like this." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My mother believed in things like this. She used to say that the true meaning of giving was in being present." Emily's brow lifted with interest. "You sound like you know a thing or two about giving." William hesitated, the familiar instincts to guard and deflect warring with the sincerity of the moment. "I grew up privileged," he admitted. More than I realized, for a long time. My mother was the kind of person who could see beyond all that. She wanted me to learn that life isn't just about what you can achieve, but what you can share. He swallowed, feeling the vulnerability settle into the space between them. I think somewhere along the way, I forgot that. Emily smiled, a quiet expression that spoke more than words could. Well, it's never too late to remember, she said, offering him a cookie from the nearly empty plate. They ate in companionable silence until a clatter from the kitchen caught their attention. One of the younger volunteers had dropped a metal bowl, its echo ringing out like a playful alarm. William and Emily exchanged glances, then burst out laughing. It was an easy, shared moment, the kind that bridged gaps and turned strangers into friends. You know, Emily said, pushing back her chair, I've got to give you credit, Liam. Not everyone would jump in the way you have. I've seen plenty of first-day volunteers get scared off by the chaos. Well, William teased, it might help that I'm stubborn. He reached for another cookie, breaking off a piece and handing it to Emily without thinking. Their fingers brushed, a simple touch that carried a jolt he hadn't expected. She seemed to feel it, too, her smile faltering for a heartbeat before it returned, softer this time. I like stubborn, she said, eyes glinting as she leaned back. Stubborn gets things done. Except peeling carrots, apparently, William shot back, grinning as they both recalled the morning fiasco that had left him surrounded by orange shavings and a few raised eyebrows. Emily laughed, the sound musical and contagious, drawing smiles from nearby volunteers who glanced over at them with knowing looks. Okay, I'll give you that one, she conceded. But you're improving. Thanks to a good teacher, he said, the compliment slipping out before he could think twice. He was rewarded with a light blush that swept across her cheeks. For a moment, the chaos of the day faded to the edges, leaving just them in that pocket of warmth and light. William found himself studying her face, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, the small dimple that appeared only when she was truly amused. It was a scene he never expected to find himself in, yet here he was, feeling more like himself than he had in years. A loud bang broke the spell, the kitchen door swinging open as Ruth announced, "All right, enough resting, folks. We've got to prep for the evening crowd." Groans and laughter rippled through the volunteers, and Emily stood up, stretching her arms above her head. "Back to it?" she said, looking down at William. "Back to it," he agreed, rising to his feet with a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with the work itself. As they returned to their stations, exchanging playful comments and helping the others gear up for the next wave, William felt something shift. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a connection that hinted at the possibility of more, something that made the ache of tired muscles feel like a small price to pay. The day started off smoothly enough, filled with the usual bustle of preparing for the evening's Thanksgiving meal. The kitchen was a cacophony of clinking pots, the hiss of steam, and the lively banter of volunteers weaving around each other like practiced dancers. Emily stood at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, eyes darting between the checklist and the growing stack of trays. She was energized, driven, and confident. Then, as if on cue, the day decided to turn on them. It began with a quiet murmuring in the supply room that grew into a concerned murmur throughout the kitchen. Marco, his brows knit with worry, rushed over to Emily. "We've got a problem," he said, voice low to keep the others calm. "We're short on turkeys, half of the order never arrived." Emily's eyes widened as she processed the news. "What? How is that possible? I confirmed the delivery yesterday." She ran a hand through her hair, the earlier sparkle in her eyes dimmed by a wave of stress. The room seemed to pause, volunteers exchanging worried looks as the news trickled through. William, working nearby, felt the shift in energy like a change in temperature. He stepped closer, catching Emily's murmured conversation with Marco. "We'll have to make do with what we have." Maybe we can stretch the servings, add more sides, she said, her voice strong but laced with tension. Emily, William interjected gently, catching her eye. How short are we? By at least 30 servings, she admitted, sighing. I don't want to turn anyone away. Not today. The crease between her brows deepened as she glanced around, taking in the hopeful faces of volunteers who trusted her to keep things running smoothly. William felt a surge of determination. This was a challenge that called for action, not deliberation. Without hesitation, he stepped into the hallway, pulling out his phone. He didn't want to draw attention, so he spoke in a low voice. Martin, it's Liam. I need you to call in a favor and get 30 cooked turkeys delivered to the community center ASAP. Yes, today. I know it's last minute. Make it happen. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and returned to the kitchen, where the tension was palpable. Emily was explaining the plan to shift some portions and bolster them with extra sides when William caught her eye. He offered a small nod, hoping it conveyed some sense of reassurance. Minutes ticked by, stretching into an hour that felt far longer. Volunteers whispered among themselves, their movements jerky with the uncertainty that hung in the air. Emily was everywhere at once, lending a hand with cranberry sauce, checking on roasting vegetables, and trying to project an aura of calm. But William noticed the way her shoulders tensed and how she chewed her lip, a tell he'd come to recognize. Just as the nervous energy in the room peaked, the sound of wheels rolling across the floor turned every head. A delivery person in a crisp white shirt pushed a trolley loaded with steaming, foil-covered trays into the kitchen. Delivery for Emily Hart, he announced, looking around for confirmation. Emily's eyes went wide as she stepped forward, stunned into silence. The volunteers broke into a low murmur of disbelief and then relief as they realized what this meant. I didn't, how did we, she started, turning to find William watching her with a calm smile. Sometimes, things work out, he said, keeping his tone light. Her eyes narrowed, the hint of suspicion in her gaze unmistakable, but gratitude quickly overtook it as the team sprang into action, dividing up the new supplies and prepping for the evening. Once the immediate chaos subsided and the kitchen hummed with renewed purpose, Emily pulled William aside. The noise of the volunteers created a blanket of sound that allowed for a private conversation. Liam, I have to ask, how did you manage this? Her expression was caught between curiosity and something harder to read, like she was piecing together a puzzle. William considered his answer carefully, acutely aware of the fine line he was walking. I have a few friends in the food business, he said, offering a casual shrug. Just called in a favor. Friends who can deliver 30 cooked turkeys on Thanksgiving, she pressed, a smile quirking the corner of her mouth. She wasn't fully convinced, but there was a trace of amusement in her eyes. It's amazing what people are willing to do when they hear it's for a good cause, he replied, holding her gaze for just a moment too long. The room around them seemed to blur, leaving only the two of them standing in that charged space. Emily broke the stare, a soft laugh escaping her. Well, however you did it, you saved the day. We owe you, Liam. The words were sincere, but the hint of doubt lingered in the air between them. Just happy to help, William said, though his heart thudded with an unexpected pang. For the first time in a long while, it wasn't just the program or the community he was trying to win over, it was her. They both returned to the kitchen, the earlier tension replaced by the upbeat rhythm of volunteers who knew they would make it through. Emily picked up a spatula, turning to him with a grin. Think you're ready to help me carve one of these turkeys? I promise not to judge your knife skills. William laughed, a sound that felt easy and real. Only if you're prepared to give me a few pointers, he teased back, the challenge sparking a shared smile. As they moved side by side, carving and plating the food, the earlier doubts in Emily's mind lingered. She glanced at William when he wasn't looking, trying to piece together the contradiction he represented. There was more to him than his easy demeanor and quick problem-solving suggested. And for the first time, she wanted to know exactly who this new volunteer really was. The evening sun had long given way to the cool blue of twilight, casting deep shadows across the quiet street outside the community center. Inside, the kitchen still buzzed with activity, though the sounds were softer, more deliberate. The volunteers had trickled out, and now only a few remained, their voices hushed as they tied up loose ends. Emily and William stood shoulder to shoulder at a long prep table, surrounded by stacks of aluminum trays and the comforting scent of baked goods. "Pass me that cinnamon, will you?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with exhaustion but light-hearted. She reached for a bowl, her fingers brushing his as he handed her the spice. "Here you go," William said, a smile playing at his lips. He watched as she sprinkled cinnamon over a dish with practiced ease, the sleeves of her sweater rolled up to her elbows, flour dusting her forearm. There was something mesmerizing about the way she moved, purposeful yet relaxed. "Hard to believe we made it through today," she said, glancing up at him. The kitchen light cast a soft glow around them, making the moment feel more intimate than the busy space should allow. "Couldn't have done it without you," William replied, a sincerity in his tone that made her pause. Emily set the bowl down, folding her arms as she leaned against the table. "You know, Liam, you surprised me today. Not just with the turkey miracle, but with how you jumped in these past few days. Most new volunteers don't exactly sign up for the late shift." He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Maybe I'm learning that it's not just about showing up when it's easy." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the soft hum of the fridge. Emily's eyes softened, the guardedness that usually lingered in her gaze slipping away. "I don't talk about this much, but every year I worry that it might be our last Thanksgiving here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. William's brow furrowed, the weight of her words settling in his chest. "What do you mean?" "Funding," she admitted, a touch of frustration leaking into her tone. "Grants run out, and not every donor wants to support a community meal program when there are so many other causes. It's a constant fight to make sure we have what we need." She looked down at her hands, tracing an invisible pattern on the counter. "It scares me, thinking that one day, we might not be able to do this anymore." William watched her, his heart clenching. Here she was, the woman who had poured herself into every detail, facing the quiet fear that all her work might unravel. He'd never really considered the fragility of projects like this. For him, charity had always been a line item, something to be managed, funded, and occasionally touted. But this was different. This was personal, tangible. He cleared his throat, trying to keep his emotions in check. "I wish more people could see what this means to everyone involved. It's more than a meal." Emily nodded, the shadow of a smile on her lips. "Exactly. It's a lifeline for some, a chance to feel seen and valued. That's why I started volunteering here in the first place, to be part of something that reminds people they're not alone." The room fell into silence again, but it wasn't empty. It was thick with understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. William leaned on the counter, reflecting on the truth she'd shared. The distance between him and the world he aimed to help suddenly felt vast, and he realized how far he'd strayed from the meaning his mother had once instilled in him. He'd given donations, funded programs, but it had been ages since he'd given himself. Emily's voice pulled him back to the present. "What about you, Liam? You mentioned your mother before. Did she volunteer too?" He hesitated, then nodded. "She did. She believed in giving, not just money, but time, energy, attention. She used to say, if you don't know what it feels like to be in someone else's shoes, then you're not really helping them." His throat tightened as memories surfaced, of her warm smile and the way she'd sit on the floor with neighborhood kids, helping them with crafts during the holidays. "That's beautiful," Emily said softly, her expression open and sincere. William took a deep breath, the ache of regret mingling with newfound resolve. "I lost sight of that after she passed." I got so focused on expanding the company, on living up to the expectations around me, that I didn't make time to see what was right in front of me. Emily's eyes shimmered with a mix of empathy and curiosity. Well, for what it's worth, you're seeing it now, she said, her voice firm with conviction. She reached out and squeezed his arm, a brief touch that left a warmth he carried with him. They worked quietly for a while, plating desserts and sealing trays, moving around each other with an ease that felt natural. The night deepened, and the clatter of utensils turned into soft taps as they finished the last of the preparations. William glanced at the clock, surprised by how late it had gotten, but he wasn't tired. Not in the way he used to be, anyway. This was a different kind of exhaustion, one that came with a full heart. As they packed up, Emily let out a yawn and laughed at herself. Looks like we made it, after all, she said, eyes drooping but satisfied. Yeah, William replied, watching her closely. We did. When the last tray was set and the lights dimmed, Emily walked him to the door. The night air was cool, biting just enough to make their breath visible. She paused, looking up at the stars peeking through the thin veil of clouds. Thanks for being here, Liam. Really? He nodded, hands buried in his pockets. I wouldn't be anywhere else. The words settled between them, not quite an admission, but more than a simple reply. As she turned to lock the door, he made a silent promise. Whatever it took, this wouldn't be their last Thanksgiving. He'd make sure of it. The community center was alive with movement and chatter as guests filed in, their smiles wide and eyes bright with anticipation. The scent of turkey, herbs, and freshly baked bread enveloped the room, mingling with the warmth of laughter and conversation. Every chair was filled, from the elderly couple holding hands to the young parents with toddlers bouncing on their laps. Volunteers weaved between tables, serving food and sharing stories, their own excitement contagious. William stood beside Emily, dressed in his simple apron, sleeves rolled up and ready for whatever the day might bring. For a moment, he just watched, taking in the faces, the bursts of joy when someone recognized a friend, the comfort that spread with each plate set before a guest. This, he realized, was what it meant to make an impact. It was far from a glossy newsletter photo or a corporate tagline. It was real, and it was right in front of him. Looks like we're going to need more rolls, Emily said, nudging him with a playful grin. Her eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of seeing everything come together. I'm on it, William replied, heading toward the kitchen, where the air was even more charged. Volunteers called out for utensils and last-minute garnishes, but the chaos had an order to it, a rhythm that everyone seemed to understand. As he filled a basket with rolls, he caught snippets of conversation that wrapped around him like a warm scarf. Best meal of the year, an elderly man said, raising his fork like a toast. Across the table, a young woman with a shy smile nodded, eyes glistening. William returned to Emily's side, the basket in hand. Here we go. Crisis averted, he said with a wink, earning a quick laugh from her. But the moment of ease was fleeting. Just as they settled into a steady flow, the lights overhead flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. The hum of conversation turned into startled murmurs, chairs scraping as guests shifted in their seats. The kitchen door swung open, and Ruth's voice rang out, "Power's down, Emily." Emily's smile faltered, worry tightening her features. The volunteers glanced at each other, uncertainty clouding the air. William's mind raced, searching for solutions. He caught Emily's eye, her usual confident calm now replaced with a flicker of unease. Everyone, it's okay. William called, the strength in his voice cutting through the rising tension. The room quieted, eyes turning toward him. We'll sort this out. For now, let's keep serving what we can. He nodded at Marco and a few others, who quickly lit a series of emergency candles kept for situations just like this. Emily watched him, her surprise evident. He moved through the room with a natural authority, rallying volunteers and guests alike. Under the soft glow of candles, the center transformed into something almost magical. The flames danced in the glass holders, casting golden light across the tables, turning worry into an unexpected kind of wonder. William leaned into the kitchen and grabbed a flashlight, heading straight for the circuit box at the back. Marco joined him, eyes wide. "Didn't think you were the type to keep cool under pressure," Marco said, holding a candle that barely kept his shaking hand steady. William smiled tightly. "You'd be surprised what pressure can teach you," he said, flipping switches and checking connections with a practiced hand. Just then, Emily's voice carried from the main room. "Everyone, how about we take this time for a story or two while we get things sorted? I know Mrs. O'Leary has some wonderful ones about Thanksgiving traditions." The elderly woman beamed, instantly launching into an animated tale about her childhood Thanksgivings, her voice a soothing distraction that wove through the room like a familiar tune. The guests relaxed, their attention shifting to the storyteller, laughter bubbling up as she reached the punchline. Within moments, William and Marco managed to get the emergency generator running, and the lights flickered back to life, greeted by a spontaneous cheer. William exhaled, muscles unwinding as the tension released. When he turned around, Emily was there, eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something else, admiration, maybe. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the noise. "Couldn't let a good meal go to waste," he said, half joking, but fully aware of the deeper truth between them. With the lights restored, the energy in the room surged back, brighter and even more jubilant. But William wasn't done. He glanced at his watch, nodded to himself, and stepped away from the crowd, making one more quick call. Minutes later, a local jazz trio he'd booked last minute arrived, their instruments gleaming as they set up in the corner. When the first notes floated through the room, guests turned in surprise, their eyes lighting up. The music was smooth and celebratory, filling the space with warmth that wasn't just from the food. Emily's mouth fell open slightly as she watched, then turned to William with raised eyebrows. "You did this?" He shrugged, a small, proud smile tugging at his lips. "Figured we could use a little music. Hope you don't mind." Tears pricked at the corners of Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away, replaced with a grin that could light up the entire room. "I don't mind at all." As the music played, volunteers swayed, some guests clapped along, and even Mrs. O'Leary tapped her feet with a mischievous twinkle in her eye. William stood beside Emily, their shoulders almost touching as they took in the scene, the culmination of days of work, the blend of mishaps and miracles. "Liam," Emily said softly, turning to him, "I think this is the best Thanksgiving we've ever had." He didn't look at her right away, letting the weight of her words settle into the space between them. "I think you might be right," he replied, finally meeting her gaze. And as the music swelled, laughter echoed, and the scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey filled the air, William felt a shift deep within, a sense of purpose that had been absent for far too long. The morning after the Thanksgiving event, the community center was quieter but still buzzing with the remnants of joy from the night before. Volunteers filtered in and out, tidying up and exchanging stories about their favorite moments. Emily stood in the kitchen, reviewing lists and making notes for next year's meal. She wore a smile, soft and content, as she recounted how Mrs. O'Leary's stories had brought everyone together and how the surprise music had turned a potential disaster into something unforgettable. William, back in his familiar apron, moved nearby, wiping down counters and sharing easy laughs with Marco. The sense of fulfillment he felt was new, as if something dormant inside him had finally woken up. He caught Emily's eye across the room, and they shared a brief, knowing smile. But the peaceful morning cracked open like ice beneath weight when Ruth shuffled into the kitchen, her face wearing a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Emily, dear, there's a reporter outside asking about the Dalton Air and the Thanksgiving program." "She said she heard he was volunteering here yesterday," Ruth said, her eyes darting to William with a questioning glimmer. The room went silent, the air thickening as if it could hold words before they were spoken. Emily's smile faded as she looked from Ruth to William, confusion knitting her brows. "What's she talking about?" she asked, the lilt in her voice strained. William opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first. The moment of truth had arrived far sooner than he'd planned, leaving him unprepared. He took a breath, the weight of everyone's eyes pressing down on him. "Emily, I was going to tell you," he began, his voice low but clear. "I'm not just Liam. My real name is William Dalton." The words settled like stones, heavy and unavoidable. Emily's eyes widened, and then something more guarded took their place. The warmth that had grown between them flickered, fragile and strained. "Dalton, as in Dalton Industries?" she whispered, disbelief wrestling with dawning realization. William nodded, the tension in the room crackling. "I came here to see firsthand what the Heart to Hands program really meant, to understand if it was doing what it was supposed to. But it became so much more than that." Emily stepped back as if she'd been burned. "So, this was all research? A corporate experiment?" Her voice was sharp, laced with hurt. "No, it wasn't like that," William said, stepping forward but stopping short when he saw her flinch. "At first, yes, I came to see how the program was run. But everything changed once I got here. Once I met you, and everyone else, and saw what this place means to people." His eyes searched hers, willing her to understand. "Emily, I fell in love with what you've built here. I fell in love with you." The room seemed to shrink, closing in around them. Emily's gaze shifted to the floor as the truth sank in, each piece clicking into place. The way he'd handled the Turkey crisis, his mysterious connections, the subtle hints that never quite added up, it all made sense now, and it hurt. The sincerity she had trusted now felt like a carefully constructed lie. "I need a minute," she said, voice tight, as she turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving William alone with the eyes of the volunteers who had once shared smiles with him but now exchanged wary glances. The minutes dragged, each one making William's regret deepen. Finally, Marco stepped forward, clearing his throat. "You know, I don't know what this means for your big, important plans, but I do know this: without you, we wouldn't have pulled off yesterday. I saw you working alongside us, and that matters." Beth, wiping her hands on a dish towel, added, "He didn't just stand around taking notes or asking questions. He was here, in the mess with the rest of us." Ruth chimed in, her voice soft but firm. "If you ask me, intentions count. And sometimes, people find their purpose in unexpected places." The murmur of agreement moved through the room, voices blending into a quiet chorus of support. William felt a flicker of hope but knew that it wouldn't mean much until he talked to Emily. He found her sitting on a bench outside, arms folded tight against the morning chill. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, and when he approached, she didn't look up. The silence between them was thick, filled with words unspoken and emotions raw. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I never meant to lie to you. I started this to understand what my mother's program had become, but I didn't expect to find what I did here. I didn't expect to find you." Emily's eyes lifted to meet his, glistening with hurt and something else, curiosity, maybe, a fragile willingness to listen. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, the question hanging between them like a challenge. "Because I was afraid," William admitted. "Afraid that if you knew who I was, you'd see me differently. And the truth is, I didn't want to be William Dalton here. I wanted to be Liam, just another volunteer who wanted to be part of something real." She let out a long breath, the tension easing just a bit. "And now? What do you want now?" "I want to make this right," he said. "Not just because I owe it to you, but because I want to be the kind of person who deserves to be here, with all of you. And with you, if you'll let me." A moment passed, long and tender. Emily's lips twitched into a small, cautious smile. "It'll take time," she said, her voice steady but not unkind. Trust isn't something you can patch up with good intentions. William nodded, the knot in his chest loosening. I know. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Behind them, the door to the community center opened, and Ruth's familiar voice called out. Are you two coming back in? There's work to be done. Emily laughed then, the sound light and real, and William's heart lifted at the sound. She stood, meeting his eyes with a look that held the past, present, and maybe a hint of what could come. Come on, Liam, she said, emphasizing the name that felt more true now than ever. We've got a lot to do. The days following the revelation were a mix of careful distance and tentative steps forward. William kept himself busy around the community center, never pushing too close but always present, whether it was helping unload donations or wiping down tables after meal prep. Emily, for her part, focused on her work, moving through her tasks with the same dedication but an air of contemplation. They exchanged polite nods, and there were moments when their eyes met across the room, holding a silent, unspoken conversation. It was late one afternoon, just as the golden light painted the walls, that Emily found William alone in the storage room, sorting supplies. She cleared her throat, and he looked up, surprise flashing across his face before softening into something more hopeful. Hey, she said, folding her arms and leaning against the doorframe. The tension of the past few days seemed to hang between them, but there was a calmness in her posture. Hey, he echoed, setting down a can of green beans and brushing his hands on his apron. Silence settled, not as heavy as before, but still cautious. I've been thinking, Emily began, eyes searching his. About everything you said, and everything I've seen from you these past weeks. I was hurt, still am, a little, but I realized something. She stepped further into the room, the familiar scent of spices and cardboard mingling with the warmth of their shared past moments. You didn't just come here to watch. You became part of this place. William's heart lifted, but he held it back, not daring to break the fragile trust forming between them. I did. And I'm so sorry for how it all started, Emily. But I promise you, it changed me in ways I didn't expect. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. I know, she said, softer now. I see it. And I can't deny that I've missed the version of you who showed up every day, whether it was to chop vegetables or lead a song with the kids. He chuckled, a sound full of relief and warmth. You mean the Liam version? Yes, she replied, her eyes meeting his with a steadiness that felt like an invitation. Liam might just be my favorite volunteer. William stepped forward, the distance between them shrinking. Emily, I want to be that person, not just here, but wherever life takes us. And I want to do more than just show up. I want to make sure this place, and places like it, never worry about their doors closing. She tilted her head, curiosity lighting her features. What do you mean? I've been talking to my board, William said, the excitement growing in his voice. I'm restructuring our company's charitable wing to focus on grassroots programs, starting with this one. And I want you to lead it. To make sure the heart of it stays true. Emily's breath caught, her hand coming to her mouth as she processed his words. Me? Overseeing it all? The idea sparked something bright behind her eyes, a blend of hope and disbelief. Yes. If you'll have the position. And, he added, voice softening, if you'll have me. Because I'd like to be part of this, with you. The weight of the offer, of the sincerity in his eyes, pressed against her chest until it burst into a warmth that spread through her. I think I'd like that, William, she said, taking the final step toward him. And for the record, I missed you, too. He reached out, fingers brushing her hand in a tentative touch that deepened when she entwined her fingers with his. They stood there, a small, quiet moment that carried the promise of so much more. Thanksgiving Day arrived with a crisp breeze and the scent of freshly baked pies wafting through the air. The community center was a flurry of activity, but this time it was different. There was no anxiety, only excitement, as volunteers moved with the assurance that today was going to be special. Guests began to arrive, their laughter blending with the clink of cutlery and the low hum of conversation. The tables were adorned with paper leaves, each one bearing a handwritten message of thanks. In the corner, a trio of musicians tuned their instruments, ready to fill the space with music that would set toes tapping and hearts warming. William stood beside Emily, greeting guests as they walked in. The older attendees patted his shoulder, and kids tugged at his apron, delighted to see him in his volunteer garb. The warmth he felt was unlike any boardroom victory, richer and deeper. As the meal began, Emily raised her glass of cider, calling for attention. The room hushed, eyes turning toward her. "I just wanted to say how grateful I am for all of you," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. This year was a testament to the power of community, and the belief that when we come together, we make something bigger than ourselves. William glanced around, seeing the nods, the smiles, and felt a swell of pride and humility. He took a step forward, raising his glass as well. "And to new beginnings," he added, his eyes finding Emily's. "To finding purpose, love, and making sure places like this always feel like home." The room erupted in a cheer, glasses clinking, and the musicians struck up a lively tune. Laughter filled the room as guests dug into their meals, conversations mingling like old friends. Marco challenged Ruth to a dance by the dessert table, and even Mrs. O'Leary clapped along, eyes twinkling. Emily turned to William, a smile that spoke of gratitude and affection lighting her face. "Looks like we did it." "No," he said, taking her hand as the noise swirled around them. "We're just getting started." They stood there, surrounded by the warmth and light of the community, an unspoken promise between them. As the music swelled and the scene unfurled with joy and togetherness, their eyes met in a look that needed no words.